Every interview that we do for this starts out with the same question. Could you introduce yourself, in the process state your name and what it is that you are known for?
Hi, I'm Tom Ruegger, and I am known for creating animated TV series like Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, Freakazoid, Hysteria, Road Rovers, Tiny Toon Adventures, that sort of stuff.
What is your earliest memory of film and or television?
My earliest experience with television, I was very interested in cartoons very early on. My favorite shows in my very early years were Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear. And they'd be on at the 6 o'clock hour when Mom was making dinner, so it would keep the little ones occupied. So I would sit there and I would watch these shows and I would draw while I was watching. And that's where my parents noticed that I had an interest in drawing and I was pretty good at it. I liked the Walt Disney Show very much, but I liked cartoons. I got up very early in the morning. I would watch these really ancient Paul Terry cartoons with Farmer Alfalfa. They were silent, but they had some music behind them. So I would watch that sort of stuff. Then they'd put on Popeyes, the really beautiful 1930 Fleischer Popeyes, and I loved those. I had a pretty good appreciation of quality animation even as a young kid. On Saturday morning, I would watch pretty much everything that went on the air. But I always gravitated toward the really funny stuff like Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Bugs Bunny. Whenever I saw the rings pop on, the Warner Brother rings, and then Porky and Daffy's heads were in the rings, I knew it was going to be something nutty. So I like that.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Metuchen, New Jersey, which is a suburb of New York City. And we would get all the New York stations. So we had lots of kids hosts on the TV, Chuck McCann, Sandy Becker, funny, crazy guys that would host.
What kind of hobbies did you have growing up?
Well, I grew up in a very traditional home. I had two older brothers, and we played baseball and football, very sports active. We had a swimming pool, so we were swimming a lot. My hobbies, I would draw a lot. And I would take T-shirts sometimes and white T-shirts and draw like monster cars, Big Daddy Roth type stuff on the T-shirts, make my own characters. So basically, in school, I played Pop Warner football and Little League. And in high school, I went on to do track and football.
Well, what was your formal education?
After graduating from Metuchen High School, I attended and graduated from Dartmouth College. It was a 4-year program. It was a Bachelor of Arts. My degree was in English, and yet I took a lot of film courses. And it was at Dartmouth where I made my first couple of animated films. I made a very primitive little bit of animation about a dog in an alley finding a magic lamp. And then I used that as my sort of presentation piece to receive a grant from the Arthur and Lily Mayer Foundation there at Dartmouth to make another animated film called The Premiere of Platypus Duck. And that one took me forever. It was it was 11 minutes long, and it took me almost my entire junior and senior year to complete it. By the time I graduated from Dartmouth, I still hadn't quite completed it. I screened it, but it wasn't really completely together yet. So with that film, I ultimately used that film as an entry into the professional field.
And when did you move out to Los Angeles?
After Dartmouth, I ran the Film Society for a year at Dartmouth, and that was just a fantastic experience because I basically just watched films every day, all day, and I worked on some of my animation ideas. And so after Dartmouth, I went back to New Jersey for a few months, and in 1978, June, I drove from Metuchen to Los Angeles in about 3 days, and upon arrival, I started calling up all the different studios. And I called up Hanna-Barbera. I was at a little dumpy motel on Sunset Boulevard, and there are no phones in the room, so there was a phone booth out front, and it was attended 24 hours a day by women of the night. This was like their hotline to get jobs. So I went out there. I said, "Can I use the phone for a few minutes?" And they said, "Yeah, but hurry it up. Don't take too long." So I called up all the different studios that I could. I'm just arrived from New Jersey. I'm an animator. I'm looking for work. And most of the people on the other end were like, yeah. So, but anyway, I called up Hanna-Barbera and they said, "Who would you like to speak with?" And I didn't know anyone there. So I said, Bill Hanna, because I knew his name. So they connected me to Bill Hanna's office. And I said, "Hi, I'm Tom Ruegger. I'm from Metuchen, New Jersey. I just drove out here. I'm an animator and I'm looking for work." And the secretary said, "Well, let me take your name and number, and if Mr. Hanna wants to call you, he'll call you." So I gave him the number of the phone booth because that's the only number I had. So I was done, and I said, "Hey, if I get a call here, will you come get me?" The women are like, "What? Go away." So I'm back in my little room looking through like the Hollywood Reporter, looking for other places to maybe try to get a job. And I get a knock on the door, and it's one of the women out there. Says, "Are you Tom Ruegger?" And I said, yes, I am. He says, "Well, there's a phone call for you, but hurry it up. I'm expecting an important call." So I ran out to the phone booth, and I got on the phone. "Hello, please hold for Mr. Hanna." So I hold for Bill Hanna, and I can't believe I got through to him. So he comes on the line. "Yeah, Ruegger." I said, "Yes, Mr. Hanna. I'm from back east. I just came out." "Yeah, we're really busy. Get over here right away." And he hangs up the phone. And so, what? I have to get over to Hanna-Barbera right away. So I find in the listing in the Hollywood Reporter where Hanna-Barbera is. It's on Cahuenga. Turns out there are a couple of different Cahuengas. There's one in Burbank and there's one in Hollywood. So I wound up in the valley. I got lost, but I finally get to Hanna-Barbera. And I go in, I get escorted into Mr. Hanna's office. And by that point, I had dropped off my actual physical portfolio at Bakshi's. And they were supposed to look at it, but I didn't have the entire portfolio. I had my portfolio now on slides. So I'm showing my portfolio to Hanna on slides, and he's looking out the window into the sunlight so he can see the slides. He says, "What the hell is that?" I said, "Oh, that's a dog." And he said, "That's not a dog where I come from." Finally, he says, "Okay, here's the deal. We have Joe has sold like 30 different shows, and we have so much work to do. We don't know what to do. I'll give you a 1-month trial period. If you can cut it, you can have a job. And for the 1 month, you'll get paid." So started the next day at Hanna-Barbera, and I was making $500 a week, which was a fortune as far as I was concerned. As an assistant animator, in-betweener, and I worked for just brilliant animators like Rudy Cataldi, Dave Tendler, and Volas Jones. And so I just worked my butt off for that first month. Basically, I had to turn out a lot of footage. I was working on the Godzilla Power Hour and Jana of the Jungle, and ultimately all sorts of different shows. Scooby and the new Fred and Barney and Casper and Superfriends. But anyway, in that first month, I would get there at like 7 a.m. and work till 8 p.m. and take work home and work all weekend because I needed to get my footage up because it was all based on how much footage you could turn out in a week, whether you kept your job or not. After about 2 months, I'm there working late, 8 p.m., walking down the hall, and I see Bill Hanna come in the opposite direction, and he's got his charts. He's working very hard himself. He's got a lot of shows to keep track of. And so I stopped and I said, "Mr. Hanna, Tom Ruegger, I just want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I survived the 1-month trial period, and just thank you so much for this job. I really appreciate it." And he says, looks at me and says, "Ruegger, yeah, Ruegger." And he looks down at his charts. He flips through them and he says, "Yeah, Ruegger, get your footage up." And then he continues down the hall. He was a great guy, but he really needed to get these shows out, and it all came down to how much footage you could churn out. I worked as an assistant animator for a year there, and then they gave me the chance to become an animator, and so I did that for a year as well. And ultimately, at the end of 79, beginning of 80, Hanna-Barbera started sending a lot of its work overseas, and that's when I started writing in the hopes of landing a writing job.
What did you write specifically when you started out?
The first thing I wrote was called, I wrote a spec script, not based on any TV show, it's just my own little cartoon idea. It was called Pitts and His Pal, and it was about two dogs in a world where, dogs are like humans. And they're at a bar. These two dogs are at a bar. And Pitts is a pit bull who's always in the pits. He's always depressed. And his pal is a character, a dog named Kegs, who just, is upbeat and happy and cheerful. So opposites. And Pitts is boning and complaining that his girlfriend, Cecil, just broke up with him and he doesn't know what to do. And he's going to kill himself. And Keg says, no, don't do that. That's silly. It's ridiculous. You can't do that. He says, I'm going to end it all. So the cartoon it's like a Roadrunner cartoon in that Pitts is trying to kill himself and Keggs is saving his life on each occasion, but Keggs gets annihilated each time Pitts is trying to kill himself. Basically, the bad stuff happens to Keggs as he's trying to save his friend. So this is the cartoon that I sent out as a spec to all the different studios that were making cartoons at the time. And Arthur Nadell at Filmation, I sent it to him, and he read it and liked it and called me in and gave me a job. He said, we can't make this cartoon. And I said, I know that, but, it shows you kind of where my head is. So that's how I got the job at Filmation.
And what year was that?
That was 1980, and I stayed there until middle of 82, so I was there 2.5 years.
Do you know what was the first script you wrote that ended up being produced at Filmation?
Well, I do. It's a tie between a Flash Gordon cartoon. There was a gremlin character. I forget the title of it, but it was a Flash Gordon cartoon, and the other one that was like the same week, because we really were on a tight schedule there. Same week that I started, Filmation got this order for a bunch of cartoons for some company. I think it was in Germany. And it was called Sport Billy. And they needed like 50 scripts in like 3 weeks, something crazy like that. So a guy named Ted Peterson worked at Filmation at the time. And Ted Peterson was the fastest animation writer on earth. And there was a secretary there that would put in the IBM, Selectric typewriter. She would put the paper in, and she would say, Ted, the paper's ready. And he would just turn to the IBM and just start typing. And he would literally, he was like almost subliminal. He was typing. He could have conversations while he was typing. He could be looking around. He could be watching the TV, just typing. And when the piece of paper got toward the bottom, she said, Ted, we have to put in a new piece of paper. He would stop. She would take that sheet out, and she'd put another piece in, and he would resume typing. Never looking down, he was a very accurate typist. And he wrote a Sports Billy cartoon, which was like 15 pages long, in about an hour. And he probably wrote like 5 a day. And so he had, by the end of the week, Ted Peterson had written half of the order of the Sports Billies. The secretary would also say, okay, we're almost near the end of the 15th page, Ted. And he'd go, okay. And he would put some final little tag scene on and push fade out. Say, okay, next script. So anyway, that's not I didn't write it that way, but I wrote a Sports Billy and I wrote Flash Gordon. And so ultimately I wrote pretty much on every show they were making there. I didn't write on Fat Albert and I didn't write on the Tom and Jerry's, but I spearheaded a show called Black Star. That was sort of my baby. I kind of story edited that and wrote a lot of the scripts. And what else? Lone Ranger, Zorro. I did a bunch of Tarzan. Anyway, whole bunch of things.
Could you describe the type of animation that was coming out of Filmation at the time?
Filmation was making animated cartoons for the U.S. market, and they were entirely made there in Reseda, California, with the crew there. So nothing was shipped out, nothing was sent overseas. It was all, written, drawn, animated, recorded, mixed, and finished there in Reseda at Filmation. The animation itself was very limited. A lot of action would take place off screen, and characters would be on screen, and they'd say, "Oh, look out for that tornado or that volcano," and you'd hear it and they'd duck or something, but it wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of time animating elaborate things. I mean, if there was a stampede of horses, you can bet that it would be a cloud with a couple of horse heads sticking out of the top. They made a show called Gilligan's Planet, and they'd have Gilligan on frame, and he'd say, "Hey, Skipper, watch out for that coconut," and you'd hear like, clonk, ow! I told you to watch out for it. You wouldn't see it. So, budgetary constraints, I guess.
As an animator, in addition to being a writer, how did you feel about that, if you're at liberty to say?
Well, I wasn't animating there. I had friends that were animating there. Tom Minton, Eddie Fitzgerald, I think Bob Klein, they were storyboarding there. They were very interested in being involved in shows that they loved, like the Bugs Bunny cartoons and Disney stuff. They wanted to be making really good animated quality cartoons, but at that point, that wasn't really available.
Could you talk about Arthur Nadell?
Art Nadell, great guy, had kids, great daughter. She was a wonderful person. He lent me his car once. I had a date and my car broke down. He lent me his car. So he was a really wonderful man, nice guy, nice boss to have, really just cared about you and was generous. And he helped me learn how to write for animation, because there are rules for kids' shows. You can't do certain things. Art started, I think his career started as a film editor. I know he edited a lot of the Gunsmoke episodes, film editor, and he ultimately transitioned to directing, and he directed a few films, including the Elvis Presley movie Clambake. And then he would direct all the live action sequences that would appear in Filmation programs, like in the Cosby Show. Bill Cosby would introduce segments, and Arthur would direct all those live action segments. There was a show called Hero High that we made about that same era, and there were live action wraparounds that Arthur directed.
Did you ever work with Lou Scheimer directly?
Oh, well, Lou ran the studio, and just one of the great guys of our business, just wonderful, funny, hilarious, and great guy. I went out to dinner a couple times with him, went to his home a couple times. He more than any boss, he felt like a contemporary. He felt like a friend. In other words, just somebody you really enjoy hanging out with. He was really just an incredibly regular guy. Never seemed to lose his temper. I mean, he kind of just rolled with whatever happened. I think his disposition was just wonderful. He had a very energized wife, and he had a couple kids, great family, lived up on top of a mountain in Tarzana, beautiful view, beautiful home. And so working with him, he gave me an assignment, I think, for a guy named Sandy Howard, was looking for a feature film, a space-based feature film, to use sets that Filmation owned and was renting space for. They made some space adventure. It had like the deck of a spaceship, the control panels, and it had caves and planet surfaces. And so Sandy Howard said, let's make a movie and use all these sets. Let's make it real cheap and fast. And So Lou called me in and said, so would you like to write this, write a comedy space thing? I said, I would love that. And so I did. And I spent like probably less than a month writing this space comedy. And I basically lampooned every sort of space movie. This is before Mel Brooks' Spaceball. Yeah, this was years before that. Well, I don't know. When was Spaceballs?
87.
Yeah, this was 81. So I loved it. I wrote this thing, and I remember Art Nadell's daughter read it and thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever read. She said, "This is great. You got to make this." And to me, the whole thing made perfect sense, but it was very outlandish and very, bizarre. And this hero was a guy named Duke Fission, and it was very much kind of a college age attitude. I mean, it was my age. It was like if Duke Fission was in a space cadet college and his girlfriend broke up with him, and anyway, so there's a lot of drinking in it and just chaos, and they wind up like blowing up the universe in the end. It's hilarious. So I liked it. Other people that read it liked it, so we gave it to Lou and Sandy Howard. Lou liked it, and Sandy Howard read it and said, I don't even understand, this is like insane. What is what is this script? I told you to write a script that we can use the sets, and you're, blowing up the universe. I mean, it doesn't. Anyway, they never made it, but it's funny.
Well, was that your favorite script you wrote while you were at Filmation?
Well, you tend to like the scripts that get made, so probably not. There were some Black Star scripts that were, I think, my favorite. I wrote the pilot for Black Star, and I just think there was a lot going on in Black Star that was pretty good. There's a pretty good Lone Ranger I wrote about the Golden Spike, where Ulysses S. Grant is in it, and I like that one. There's a Zorro episode I wrote that was very much like predecessor to Batman, in that, I had Zorro have his own sort of bat cave. So anyway, there were a bunch of scripts that I kind of enjoyed.
And at what point did you leave Filmation to go back to Hanna-Barbera? And why?
Right. Jim Ryan had been at Filmation for years and had written a lot of the Fat Alberts with a fellow named Bill Danch. Bill Danch is a real wonderful, great character who had written comedies for radio for years and years. And so Scheimer had him doing all the Fat Alberts for years. Cosby liked him. So Jim Ryan had written a bunch of those with Bill Danch, and then had gone over to Hanna-Barbera and had been the story editor of Scooby, and then he got kind of burned out. So about June 82, I think somewhere around there, he called me up and said, hey, Hanna-Barbera, they're looking for a story editor or two. They need writers. They've got a lot of shows going, and you should definitely give them a call. Margaret Lesh is there and wants you to come over. Anyway, I called up, and I was set up for a meeting to go over there like at 5 o'clock one afternoon. So I left Filmation early, and I didn't know who I was going to meet with. So I arrived and said, oh, come on, it's time for you to come down here. And they brought me in, and they sat me down in Joe Barbera's office. And Joe Barbera's sitting there in his beautifully wood-paneled, moody office with lots of his memorabilia around. And he's sitting there very much like the king of the world. I mean, which he is in that particular world. He was the king. But it's sort of dark. It's sort of like, The Godfather, a little bit like that. So he sits down. So I'm sitting down. I said, oh, it's what a pleasure to see you, Mr. Barbera. I've seen him before, but I hadn't met him like I had met Hannah and knew Hannah. So Barbera's there, and he starts telling me the plot of a Yogi Bear cartoon. And he says, so what do you think about this? And he tells me this plot about Yogi being at Jellystone, and he has to get out. He needs to break out because he's just being driven crazy by all these buses going by with school kids in them. And every time they see Yogi, the school kids look out the bus and they go, look at the bear, look at the bear, look at the bear. So Barbera's telling me this story, and this story sounds really familiar. It sounds like a cartoon I watched when I was a kid. But he's telling it in a way to, like it's a joke, like it's entertainment. So I'm kind of laughing along with it. Yeah, it's good. So what do you think of that card? He gets to the end of it, and what do you think about that? I said, oh, that's great. Is that what I'm going to be working on if I were to work here? And he said, well, I don't know. We've got all sorts of things going on, but you like that, huh? I said, oh yeah, that's funny. And he calls out to his assistant, Maggie, get Margaret in here. And Maggie brings in Margaret Lesh and said, oh yeah, so he's good, says Barbera. And Margaret said, oh well, that's great. Well, Tom, come with me and we'll talk some more. So basically, that was, I don't know what that was. It was it wasn't an audition because I didn't say anything. I just listened to Mr. Barbera's story and laughed and enjoyed it. And that was pretty much, but I guess he wanted to see if he could stand me. if he could I guess he just wanted to make sure he wasn't going to bring in some guy that was going to be a pain in the butt. And I guess if I had hated his story, he wouldn't have wanted me to be involved. So Margaret Lesh said, okay, you start on Monday. And that was great. So I went back to Filmation and said, hey, I got a great opportunity here. And the money was just crazy, much more than Filmation. I mean, Filmation was kind of low paying. So I went to Hanna-Barbera, and the first day they're making a bunch of shows, and they're packed with people, and it's crowded, and they have me move in to a shared office with a fellow named Hank Saroyan, who is one of the nephews of William Saroyan. Hank's just tremendous character, wonderful writer, brilliant writer, producer, director, just a great guy. So I am with Hank Saroyan in his office, and I think the first thing they had me look at was something with Gary Coleman, like the Gary Coleman show, and they wanted me to write a script or two for that. And they didn't have a story editor for it. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't even figure out how they sold it, but they did. Gary Coleman as an angel. So I'm reading through this, and Hank Saroyan is at that moment story editing the current Scooby series. And he says to me, he says, Gary, the Gary Coleman show, what do you think? I said, I don't know. It's a weird concept. He said, you don't want to be doing that. You want to be doing Scooby. You need to be story editing Scooby. I said, but you're story editing Scooby. And Hank Saroyan said, yeah, that's right. And I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. So Hank says, write a Scooby. So I wrote a Scooby, something like No Sharking Zone, I think was the first Scooby I wrote. And Hank loved it, and he sent it around to the different people at the studio that care about such things. And he came back and said, you're the new story editor of Scooby. And I was like flabbergasted because I'd only been there about 2 weeks. And the fact is, before I arrived at Hanna-Barbera there in 82, I had never watched a Scooby in my life. And now I'm going to be story editing. So that weekend, I took home these big 3/4-inch tapes and a big 3/4-inch tape player. And I watched many, many episodes from 1969 to 1980, 82 of Scooby. And as I was watching, I was taking notes. And so I built a pretty strong understanding of what Scooby was all about, what the show was all about. And I wrote down all sorts of things that recurred. So by the end of that weekend, I had my own sort of Scooby Bible and felt like, oh yeah, I understand this character. I get it. And so for the next, I think, 5 or 6 years, I was the story editor on Scooby.
And what responsibilities came with being a story editor versus just a staff writer?
Well, for me, you set your own standards in this kind of business. So I want things to be funny. I want some surprises to happen. I can't speak for myself. Back in 82, I probably had slightly different standards then. Part of the deal is to get this job done, to be on schedule. Hanna-Barbera was a machine, and you had to do things on a budget, but on a schedule that allows time for the animation and all the other steps. So part of being a story editor would be more meetings with Jayne Barbera and Bill Hanna, just making sure that we're on schedule and producing it and getting it done. The story has to find the writers to make the scripts. Some of those writers are on staff, but a lot of them are freelance. And then ultimately, when I said you set your own standards, if a script comes in and it's disorganized and maybe not funny, well, you either call the writer in and tell them, hey, you got to fix this, fix that, make it funny, do this, do that, or you have to fix it yourself. And I found that after 1, 2, or 3 drafts, if the writer hasn't made it into something that just sings and is perfect, then you just say, well, okay, I'm gonna do this myself. I'm gonna rewrite it. And I ultimately would rewrite every script a bit. Sometimes I'd rewrite it completely. And I had a schedule where the scripts were due usually on a Friday morning. The final script, that's going to go to the network and get approved or not approved, is due Friday morning. So almost every Thursday night, and this is not a practice or a habit I would recommend to anyone. Almost every Thursday night, I stayed at Hanna-Barbera all night long and would rewrite the script, and so that it's ready at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. And so I got to know the night janitors, and it's kind of a unique time to be working at the cartoon factory late at night. And I was definitely, besides the night janitors, the only person there. So I did that with over a course of, how many years was I there? 82 to 89, 7 years. I probably spent, usually a night every week or so at Hanna-Barbera. So I really came with the furniture there for a while.
Now, you wrote for the Scooby-Doo shows, the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show. Was that the one that you became story editor for first?
They changed the names on those things, so I think that's the name of it, but they had a lot of different names, a lot of different incarnations. Whatever program it was that No Sharking Zone was in is the first series that I wrote for and ultimately story edited. So I think it was, not sure if Fred and Velma were still involved. I think it was Daphne and Shaggy and Scooby and Scrappy. And they were 11 minutes. They weren't full half hours.
Was it hard writing for those 4 characters as a group?
Well, no, not hard. I mean, that's a good number, actually. You get the straight woman, Daphne, and you get the goofy sort of beatnik or nerd, Shaggy, and you get Scooby, Shaggy's pet, but also the cowardly dog, and then you get Scrappy, who's like in everybody's space and sort of brave and bravado. As a good group. I think when you start adding Fred and Velma, then it almost becomes cumbersome. There are so many characters. And these were 11-minute cartoons, so to carry all additional characters with Fred and Velma would have been tough.
I wanted to ask about a couple shows you wrote for. Snorks, just a quick thought on that show?
Yeah, Snorks. That was interesting because everybody at the studio was offered some Snorks because the order came in at a time where a lot of people were free and available to work on it. Gordon Bressack wrote some good ones. It was clearly like an undersea version of Smurfs. And I was never much of a Smurf writer at all. So it just played a little too young for my tastes.
Challenge of the GoBots?
Challenge of the Go. John Ludin, a co-worker, writer, very funny friend of mine. He wrote. He watched the first episode of Challenge of the GoBots in our screening room. He said it makes his eyes and ears scream. Just watching it and listening to it, it made his eyes and ears scream. Challenge of the GoBots was the, I think, Tonka toy version of Transformers, and sadly, Transformers hit and GoBots didn't. No, we made a lot of GoBots, like 65, too many.
Pound puppies?
Pound Puppies, I did enjoy that. Mitch Schauer, he and I worked on a bunch of different shows together. We worked on the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo that Mitch created that concept, and then I story edited that. And that was a lot of fun because in that one we kept that same foursome of Scooby, Shaggy, Scrappy, and Daphne, but Mitch really imbued them with new personality quirks and kind of redesigned them. And it was the first Scooby show that had like real ghosts and monsters in it. But before we worked on 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo together, Mitch and I worked on the first Pound Puppies. It was a TV special, and Jonathan Winters was in it, Ruth Buzzy. Anyway, it was designed by Mitch. So he took the Pound Puppy designs, but he made them sort of his own, and then he surrounded them with a group of nutty characters. It was very much like The Great Escape, which is a movie that I always loved and always liked to parody when I could. So that first special, I think, was really unique and funny and intense. Then a series was sold based on that, and the network got involved, and they sort of removed some of the edge to it and made it a little bit more kid-friendly. But the series itself was, I think, pretty funny and had Katrina Stonehart and Bratina, her daughter, who was really obnoxious. And so I like Pound Puppies. And John Ludin and I story edited Pound Puppies together.
How much creativity did you have when you were writing a script in free range, if any, at the time?
Well, I think on Filmation, I think on Animaniacs, complete freedom. Because it was my show and I had created it, and I could basically write anything I wanted for that. So freedom is relative to, depends on the project. Scooby, I think we had, when you're doing a fresh take on it, you have more freedom. Like when I developed and produced a pup named Scooby-Doo, there was a lot of freedom because it was a new version, a new take, so you could get away with new things. We did wild takes in the pup named Scooby-Doo, and we put music, singing background score on a pup named Scooby-Doo, which nobody had done. We had this vocal group that was offering a cappella music score in pup named Scooby-Doo. It was like skadooby-doo-dooby, skadoob-doo. I mean, it was great. So creative freedom, I think once you're story editor or a producer in TV, on cartoons, you start having a lot of freedom.
Would you get notes from networks, standards and practices? I know that they came up more later with the Warner Brothers stuffs, but when you were at Hanna-Barbera, did you get any kind of interaction like that at all?
Yes, I'd say we got more notes from network standards and practices during my Hanna-Barbera days than I ever got at Warner Brothers. The networks were very, very much into looking out for their viewers, and they didn't want anything that was imitatable. They didn't want anything that could be misconstrued or anything that kids might do following the show. So we had to be pretty careful.
Yogi's Treasure Hunt?
Like that one, too. I think I kind of grabbed that one. They had a bunch of shows in the works that they were going to use for Hanna-Barbera's Fantastic something or other. It was something Joe Barbera sold for Sunday mornings. So Saturday mornings were, busy with network shows, but Joe sold a Sunday morning syndication package, and he needed sort of a flagship show, and he wanted to do something like Yogi's Art Clark or something to that effect. And So Treasure Hunt, Yogi's Treasure Hunt was proposed, and Barbera wanted to do that. And I said, "Oh, you got to let me do that, Joe," because remember, Joe, I listened to your Yogi Bear story years ago, and I liked it. So anyway, he knew that I was a huge Yogi fan, so he let me run with Yogi's Treasure Hunt. So John Ludin and I story edited Yogi's Treasure Hunt, and the reason I loved it is because it reunited Yogi with all the characters from the early series, from the Huck series, from the Quick Draw series, from the Yogi series. And those were my bread and butter. Those are the characters I grew up with loving. And it was just a treat to work with those characters, on those characters. And we had Daws Butler, the voice of those characters, doing them again, and Don Messick doing his contribution to those voices. So Ludin and I loved it. And after sessions, after recording sessions, Daws Butler would stop by our office and give us tips on how to write for certain characters. Like Snooper wouldn't say that. Quick Draw would say it this way. He was a godsend. And people like Paul Winchell, who did the voice of Dastardly, he would stop by and start telling us about some new show ideas he had. Anyway, it was a trip. It was just a great, fun series. And, not animated perhaps as well as one might wish, but the writing process was a lot of fun.
You were one of 3 writers on the 25th anniversary celebration of the Flintstones?
Yes.
Any memories of that?
I remember the Variety review. The Variety review of it was script by Tom Ruegger and John Ludin, NSG. Do you know what that means?
NSG. What? Well, for anyone, no, I don't. And for anyone listening, what does that mean?
Not so good.
Ah.
And Variety is right. However, the show the was 25th anniversary
25th
of the Flintstones. Is that what it was? Yeah. The script that John Ludin and I wrote was good. It was we think it was just fabulous and funny. Not a word of it was used. The producer of the special, Bob Guenette, just threw it out and did whatever the heck he wanted, which was not so good.
How was yours different? Do you remember what yours was?
We based ours on a really great documentary made about, I think, maybe Bugs Bunny's 25th or something like that, and something produced by Lorne Michaels years before. And it treats the characters as real characters in that that special would have Bill Murray playing pool and talking about what an a-hole Yosemite Sam is, and how he would go drinking with Sam, and Sam would always just flip out and pull out the 6-shooters and cause havoc. And so we loved that, and we thought, well, let's do that with the Flintstones. Let's have celebrities talk about Fred and Barney like they're real living characters and that whole thing. And we even lined up some celebrities that said, yeah, I'd love to do it. So then Bob Guenette gets assigned as the producer, and he turns the whole show into sort of like kind of pablum, just not really elite sophisticated comedy by any means.
You brought up Pup Named Scooby-Doo. Was that a Joe Barbera idea, or was that your idea?
That was my idea. Jenny Triez, Amy Simon, Squire Rushnell at ABC came to me and said, we want to bring Scooby back, but we want to do something new. What do you have? Do you have any ideas? And so I gave it some thought, and I came up with some designs. Scott Jeralds helped with the designs. Alfred Gimeno helped. And I proposed a Pup Named Scooby-Doo, which would be the early years. And it would be truly like a period piece. It would be taking place in the early 60s. And, just we'll meet the families. We'll see the first adventures of Shaggy and Scooby together as kids. And they loved it. They loved the idea. And so we went with that. And that was, I think, that was my first producing job, and just a really great experience. Worked with just great people on the show, the writers and the producer and the animators and the artists. Glenn Kennedy was our overseas supervisor, and he added a lot of great wild take energy. John Debney was wrote the scores and the songs for the new series. We had a great cast. We had the original Shaggy playing the teenage version of Shaggy, Casey Kasem. We just sped his voice up a little bit. And we had Don Messick playing Scooby, and he played it a little bit higher in his pitch. And anyway, the show was very successful, and it kind of breathed some new life into Scooby.
In 1989, you were given the offer to go work for Warner Brothers, I know. How did that offer come to you?
I was working there at Hanna-Barbera. I got a call one afternoon in January of '89. Gene McCurdy, who had been the writer's supervisor at Hanna-Barbera until she had left a few months before, she called me up and said, "Hey, so I got something going on. Can we meet at the Money Tree?" It was like a bar restaurant in Toluca Lake. I think that's where we met. Anyway, so I met her at the Money Tree, and she said, "Hey, Spielberg wants to make a series of new cartoons featuring junior versions of the Looney Tunes. Would you like to come produce it and develop it and make it happen?" And I said, "Yeah." I said I would. But I'm under contract in Hanna-Barbera, so I can't say I can definitely do it. I'd have to talk to them first. And so that's what I did. I went over. The next day I went to Hanna-Barbera. I went to Bill, and I went to Joe separately. And I said, "Here's the opportunity. I think I should take it, and I hope you'll let me. And, I love it here, but, this seems like something I probably should go do." And they were very gracious, and they let me out of my deal. I had a contract there. They let me out that day. And so the following day, I started work at Warner Brothers.
So how long did it take to develop? Was it actually called Tiny Toon Adventures from the start?
No, it was called Tiny Toons, and it was spelled Tunes, Tiny Toons. And all they had when I got there was a drawing of a rabbit, a young rabbit, which I think they were calling Bitsy Bunny, and the title Tiny Toons, Tunes. That's all they had. So, and I knew that when I got there that I had a meeting with Steven Spielberg. Gene said, "We're having a meeting with Steven Spielberg 1 week from today, and he wants us to tell him what Tiny Toons is." So that week I spent working on the idea of what Tiny Toons would be. And I'll just say that the day of the event, the day of the meeting, I'm at home and I've written up all the tons of material, and I had characters, and I had locations and situations and school, and and I had new personality quirks for the different younger versions of the characters. And the meeting's I have to get in the car in like an hour and drive over to Burbank. And I guess I suddenly realized, wait, I quit my great job at Hanna-Barbera to go over to Warner Brothers and work on something that could vanish overnight. It could, because you never know. And for, the king of Hollywood, who may not like me, who may not like my ideas, and I could be out of this job tomorrow, and I have quit Hanna-Barbera. I think I've made a horrible error. And I just had this panic attack. And it's an hour before the session, the meeting. And I was like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Oh! So my wife, Adrienne, comes in and says, "What's wrong?" So I explain it to her, and she says, here, just tell everyone about your favorite cartoon. And that's what I did. So I went to the meeting and I told them what I loved about Looney Tunes. And they are my favorite cartoons. Just the energy, the sassiness, the irreverence, the unique, zany personalities, the huge music behind the actions, the beautiful animation. But just the goal to entertain kids in little 7-minute shorts. The goal to just be different, be funny. And anyway, so I told them about my favorite Looney Tune cartoons, Merry Melodies, and I said that's what I'm trying to bring to a modern audience. And then I started going over the characters and the situations, Acme Acres and the Acme University. And so by the end of the meeting, I was in like Flint. It was let's start making it. And anyway, it went well. So I appreciate my wife, Adrienne, the mother of my kids, telling me, tell them about your favorite cartoons, because that's what it comes down to. And now my favorite cartoons, some of them are the ones we've made.
Some of my favorites are the ones you've made.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
How long did it take to develop Tiny Toon Adventures?
Well, like I said, that first week was huge. It was a major slog. So after that, then we started staffing up. We started bringing artists and writers on to start expanding on where we were heading. And, well, let's see. So really in 1989, it was January. So we probably didn't have offices until August or July. But so we were for 3 or 4 months, we were in Warner Brothers Burbank office, which was a very cramped space. Development, you see, for Tiny Toons, development was ongoing. We were making cartoons, but we were still developing some of the additional characters. So I'd say development is sort of almost a writing process that goes along with the script. So we might write a script that gives us new insight into Babs or new insight into Dizzy. So the development's sort of ongoing. But we were probably producing cartoons, writing scripts that were finalized, I think, by April of '89.
What kind of notes would Steven Spielberg give you in regards to that show, if you remember?
Oh, sure. It took, it evolved, if you know what I mean. I mean, I remember being on vacation for a weekend down in Laguna, and I knew Steven was back east, so I didn't expect to hear from him over the weekend. But that was a mistake, because at 7 a.m. my phone rang, and it was Steven, not sort of paying attention to the fact that it's 7 a.m. on Sunday morning in L.A. while it's 10 a.m. in New York. And he starts giving me notes on a script, on a storyboard. Now, I didn't have the storyboard in front of me, and I didn't even have paper. So he starts giving me detailed notes, like frame by frame of the storyboard. And then on page 14, panel 3, I think what we need here, we need a shot that's not a pan, because a pan takes too long. It is slow, the pan, and it just pull back and show the entire shot in a wide angle, and then you'll see everything, but you don't have to spend 5-6 seconds. You can spend 2 seconds on it. So he's giving me this sort of notes, and I'm writing all this stuff out on a Ralph's grocery store brown paper bag, and I get to the bottom of one side of the bag, and I turn the bag over and continue. And then I had to rip the bag open and start writing on the inside of the bag. Anyway, he would give us lots of notes. He early on, he was giving us notes on, the voices, and because he would listen to the recordings. Gene McCurdy and I, he was making the movie Always, I think it was called, with Richard Dreyfuss. So anyway, and we had the voices for Tiny Toons. So we need to get his sign off on the voices, and this was in the day before sending MP3s and over the internet. This is where you had to deliver tapes, hard copies, and they put it in a tape player and listen. So to make it happen quick, to get his response, McCurdy and I flew up to some godforsaken place in the middle of Washington State, some little airstrip where we had to take a plane to like Seattle and then a little puddle jumper to this remote location where there are tents set up, and we go to a tent and Spielberg's in the tent, and we need a generator turned on so we can play the tape for him. So we play these different voices, and he approves the different voices. Kathy Kennedy's sitting there listening too, and one of the funniest things I recall is she called to her assistant and said, "Could you get Andre in here, please?" So Andre comes in. Andre is a huge muscle-bound guy in a white T-shirt and white pants, and she points at the tip of her elbow, and she said, "I'm still having a little aggravation right there." And Andre, this 250-pound muscle-bound guy, goes over to Kathy Kennedy and pinches his two fingers together and massages the very tiny tip of her elbow for like 10 minutes as she's sitting there watching the meeting. I can't believe it. Anyway, kind of off the point. But we flew up to Washington, we got his approval, and we came back and we started recording the shows. But Stephen would give us notes all over the place. There's a cartoon I wrote called Phone Call from the 405. It's a Tiny Toons cartoon, and it's literally about Stephen. It's a true story about Stephen driving down the 405, talking to us on the phone, giving us notes while he's paging through a storyboard. And I don't know how he was driving and doing all that, but he did. And he would even, in the next car, he would notice someone. He said, "Oh, look, it's Michelle. Hi, Michelle. How you doing?" Bizarre. So he would give us notes all the time. And at that point in the production, he said, we need more shadows on the characters because shadows make the show look classier, like more production value. So make sure you put more shadows on the characters, like core shadows, not just the shadow beneath them, but the core shadow. Now, the fact is, core shadows do not improve the animation. They don't have anything to do with the actual animation, the movement of the characters. The core shadows just create the illusion of there's some shadows going on. So now ACOM, our South Korean studio, was great at putting the core shadows on, but the animation didn't match our animation out of Cuckoo's Nest in Taipei or TMS out of Tokyo. So Stephen loved the core shadows, and he really appreciated the work from ACOM, but the really great animation was coming from TMS and from Cuckoo's Nest and from Kennedy's and McClenahan's operations in Canada and in Chicago.
Could you describe the format for Tiny Toon Adventures? I know that it's based off of the old Looney Tunes, but could you describe the typical episode?
Yeah, we'd see the main title, and then Buster and Babs would appear in almost anywhere. They could be in the woods with standing in front of a wheel that will select the cartoons. You ask for it type thing, or it's a random selection. Or it would be a theme, and that's what I pitched originally. That the series, each half hour, would have a theme, and part-time job theme, or a holiday theme, or Valentine's, or So anyway, there'd always be a theme, and Babs and Buster would set the tone. One theme was like, they have colds and they're going to stay home and watch cable TV all day, and you'd be little selections from a cable TV show, different shows. So anyway, they were the hosts, and they would come back in between the cartoons, and it was very much the format of the very early Huckleberry Hound cartoon show and Yogi Bear and Quick Draw McGraw cartoon show. Those shows had these sort of wraparounds around the longer cartoon segments.
Would you mix and match the shows, or would they all be written for the same 30-minute episode?
Great question, and I can tell you that Animaniacs, which we'll get to, but that we did not. Animaniacs, we made the entire series as individual cartoons, and I would have the different cards of the Animaniac cartoons on the wall, and I would literally piece the shows together like a month or so before they were going on the air, and put appropriate cartoons with each other and build it out to a half-hour length. Tiny Toons was different in that we actually made, while we wrote the cartoons completely in a vacuum, and each cartoon was like written by its own writer, and we weren't trying to give it any thematic connection to any other cartoons. When we made the half hours, though, once we were making the half hours, we would pull them together, and then I would write a wraparound for Buster and Babs.
What was the initial viewer feedback from Tiny Toon Adventures? I know that the primary audience was children. Did you receive any sort of feedback in that when the show originally aired?
Yeah. Well, again, Variety, in this case, Variety said, "Oh my gosh, this is like cartoon second coming." They just waxed poetic over it. They said it's an evergreen. I can already tell you this is an evergreen. The Variety writer. Basically, we knew it was good and the right thing when every animator, artist, and person working in animation in town started coming over trying to get work with us. We knew it was good when the Disney Afternoon got crushed by it, and Disney immediately started trying to steal our artists. But the problem for Disney was that the artists really liked sort of the irreverence of our cartoons, and Disney did not have that going on. So the artists were very reluctant to go over to Disney where they knew what kind of cartoons would be made, wuzzles and stuff. So the ratings were really high. T-shirts at Target were selling, so we knew it was a hit.
And in that regard, was that your first Emmy win?
Yes. I actually won 3 Emmys right off the bat for writing for the series, for producing the series, for writing the series, and for writing the lyrics of the main title. The first one was the lyrics for the main title.
How did it feel to win the Emmys?
Just awesome. I mean, the first one was at sort of an industry dinner here in LA. So we went for the main title, and that felt so great. And to have the Warner Brother bosses there, and they're excited because they know that the show's a hit and it's also getting accolades. Then the following weekend, a bunch of us flew to New York City, and on a big stage, we won for the best animated series. And we went up on stage with a big gang of us, and we said, "Stephen, don't worry about." I give the speech. I said, "Stephen, don't worry about not winning an Oscar," because he hadn't won an Oscar by then. "Don't worry about not winning an Oscar, Stephen, because now you're the proud owner of a daytime Emmy." And then we just like to thank a few of these people. And Sherry Stoner unrolled the scroll that unrolled and went down into the audience. It was so long. And Dick Clark almost had a fit because he was the producer. He thought we were going to stay on stage too long. Anyway, that was a big, exciting win. And we won a bunch more as the years went by.
Was that an initial 65 episode order for Tiny Toons?
Yes, that is correct.
Was that the first 65 order that you'd produced? I'm assuming that there weren't many at Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah, the 65 the number 65 episodes was the magic number for syndication. Apparently, if you had 65 episodes, you could safely be syndicated and theoretically run for a long time. So it's what is that? It's 13 episodes times what, 5? Yeah, it's 13 episodes times 5. So 13 weeks of a daily strip show.
Was it hard to come up with 65 episodes worth of material?
Oh, never. No, not at all. We always had too many ideas. Yeah, we basically, you want to put your stars in some great vehicles for them. So at some point we knew that Tiny Toons was all about Buster, Babs, and Plucky. And while we had great ideas for other characters, we tended to, not do many cartoons about Little Beeper and, not too many Sneezer cartoons. And then we actually came up with a couple of characters that sort of demanded more attention. There was a character named Foulmouth who was not really very much related to Foghorn Leghorn, but kind of looked like a junior version of him. But he had, his issue was that he swore all the time, and we would bleep him. And that character became pretty popular. And so we started doing cartoons with him. And then we also had a version of Plucky that was Baby Plucky. And that was based on my kids. So that character became popular too, and we did a few cartoons with him.
How did the network censors react to Foulmouth?
It's funny. The network censors didn't give us much heat because I tended to tell them that Steven liked it, and they had no way of knowing if that were true or not, and they had no way of proving me wrong because they couldn't get through to him. So I'd say, well, Steven really likes Foulmouth. Oh, he wants that. We'll bleep him. It'll be funny. And they're like, oh, okay. So.
Do you have any favorite episodes of Tiny Toon Adventures?
I'm sure I do. I like the first one a lot. That was a lot of work. The first episode, the pilot, was really not the first episode we produced. It was like the 35th episode. And we started it late, and it was going to be a very tight schedule to get it on the air on time. And it was scheduled for a special presentation on CBS on Friday night at like 8:30. So we had a time slot and we had a date, but we had a problem because the company that was animating the show was having a huge delivery problem. And they went radio silent on us about a month before the show was due. And they basically imploded. So about a month before the show was going on the air, we didn't have it. And it looks like it wasn't animated. So we're like totally screwed. And Spielberg's clamoring for it. So Rich Ahrens and a bunch of the artists and I, we went that weekend. We took the storyboard for this special. We did layouts for the entire show that one weekend. All hands on deck. And then we shipped the layouts and the voice tracks and color additional and the designs for the extra characters to Taipei, to James Wong and Cuckoo's Nest. And they put their entire staff of hundreds of artists on this one special Tiny Toons, theoretically pilot episode. And they churned out the animation for this thing in like 2 weeks. So we got it all. We cut it together. We got some retakes done, scored it. We scored it the day before it went on the air. And it looks really good, which is the amazing thing. Anyway, Cuckoo's Nest saved our lives on that one. But my favorite episodes, my favorite episode of Tiny Toons is just a part of a short, a part of a half hour. And it's called the Anvil Chorus. That's my favorite. It's where Buster and Babs are presiding over a concert at the Hollywood Bowl. And they invite Plucky on stage to be present and to witness their rendition of the Anvil Chorus. And what follows is quite literally Plucky Duck being clobbered by anvils for about 6 minutes. And it makes me laugh.
What was the typical turnaround for the animation process for a cartoon at that time?
Oh, months and months. The script will take a long time, and then the storyboard will take a long time. So I'd say best case scenario, your script through storyboard, best case scenario is about 3 months, 2-3 months. Then overseas, if they were to hop on it immediately, they could probably get it done in another 2 or 3 months. So maybe best case scenario, 4 months, but probably more like 7 months. Because everything is happening all at the same time. I mean, you're writing scripts, you're storyboarding a different one, you're animating a different one, so it's all overlapping. And sometimes energy gets devoted to a specific episode. I remember we made an episode called The Acme Bowl. It was a football episode. And, I liked it a lot. I thought the story was solid. And they were going against a rival high school. And so we got it back, and it was Glenn Kennedy animated it, and Glenn Kennedy, very good animator, has a specific style that's all his own. And the characters, they look like Glenn Kennedy drew the characters. And with animation like this, that's going to happen now and then, that you're going to get someone whose style is very evident. John McClenahan's Star Toons, they made some Tiny Toons and some Animaniacs, and their cartoons have a definite style. So Kennedy's Acme Bowl got back here, and Steven saw it and hated it. He said, they all look bad. There's no shadows on anything. You got to reanimate the whole thing. Now, that would have been okay, but he he told me this in the middle of our big, launch party. He's like, everybody, hey, we're drinking everything. And he gets me over in the corner and says, that thing's a piece of shit. You got to fix it. And, oh, wow, okay. I guess I'm not going to, I guess I'll stop drinking now. Anyway, so there were challenges all across the board. But by the time we were on the air, Steven was delighted. And by the way, the name Tiny Toon Adventures didn't happen until maybe 5 months before we went on the air. We had to change the main title because we already finished it. Tiny Toons is about to start. It's Tiny Toon. Anyway, yeah, Tiny Toon Adventures. And we wondered why, because we love the name Tiny Toons. And Steven said, kids like adventure. All right.
What was your involvement with Batman the Animated Series?
Well, I was there for the very first meetings, and Warner Brothers had a big success with the Batman feature film, and they said, let's investigate this whole idea of an animated series. And, of course, Batman had been in a bunch of different animated series over at Hanna-Barbera, Superfriends and different things, and that's the last thing we wanted to do. McCurdy and I both felt that we wanted to do a show like Fleischer's Superman from the 40s. Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski both felt the same way and produced the series, and Alan Burnett and Paul Dini were story editors. Before Alan and Paul showed up, I story edited some of the first episodes, and I wrote some of the early episodes. But I was kind of swamped with Tiny Toons and Animaniacs and different things, so we really needed those two, Alan and Paul, to take it on. And they also are huge, knowledgeable Batman fans, so they were perfect.
How did you handle having so much responsibility at Warner Brothers at the time?
I went out of my mind. I don't know. I think I got stressed, actually. It was a lot. There was a lot to do. And however, the fact is, I mean, this is what I wanted to do with my life. And I honestly didn't think I was going to have the opportunity to make, top quality cartoons. But that's what I always wanted to do. Even though it was a lot of work, I needed to be grateful for the opportunity, and I definitely was. I got very friendly with a lot of the people I worked with, a lot of the writers, artists. after a year or so, basically you're working with friends and you're laughing with friends and you're appreciating the work of everybody, and it really becomes just a lot of fun.
If such a thing existed, what was the typical day like for you at Warner Brothers Animation?
Well, I'll probably forget something, but I'll try to go over some of the things that I found myself doing. I'll go with the night before. The night before, I'm preparing for the next day, so I'm probably reading a script and marking it up with notes for a writer that is waiting notes. And I'll be going over premises that people have submitted for new episodes, and I'll plan on touching base with people on which ones we should pursue. I'll probably have a storyboard or two to go over, and with those, I'll use a red pen and go through. Because the thing is, I've been following the story from its inception, from its, the concept of the idea, the premise, and I'll be following it to the answer print. So I tend to know a lot about each story. So when I go to the storyboard, I'll know pretty well what the point of this cartoon is, and if the storyboard veers off and it goes in a different direction than it should, I'll be able to point that out. But I'll cut out things at the storyboard level that I think aren't working. And I have one of my big problems with storyboards is I have a directional issue. I like the action to go from left to right. Now that's on a stage really, but in general, I like that to happen, and then the conflict can come in from the right and meet the character moving to the left. And sometimes cartoons, literally, the storyboard artist will have flipped everything, so it's kind of everything's going in the wrong direction as far as I'm concerned. And every now and then I would ruin the day of a PA who would have to take all the panels and flip them, which is a pain in the butt. Anyway, so the night before, I might be going over the voice tracks for a cartoon, listen to those. Anyway, the next day, I'll go in. Kathy Page, my assistant, will have a bunch of calls that I need to make. But I'll meet with Richard Stone, or whoever's composing the music for this week's set of cartoons. And we will sit down and watch the rough cut of a half hour. And sometimes I'll have the director come in, or sometimes the story editor come in, and the four of us will sit around and enjoy the cartoon, but we'll also talk about what music hits we think are needed where, what kind of music where, should this be suspenseful here? Should this be comic here? So we'll do that. And maybe Richard would come in with Julie Bernstein and Steve Bernstein, who are also composers. Maybe we'll do 2 different half hours and we'll cover it all. So that's something that would be happening on a typical day. Also, there'll be a mix. So we used to go to a place called Sound Castle, which was over in Glendale. So I drive over to Glendale, and that's where we've got very much close to final picture on the cartoon. Say it's a half hour, like Babs in Wacky Land. And Tom Madek and his crew will be putting the music in, adding the sound effects, making sure the dialogue can be heard over the music and sound effects, and just mixing it all together and making it the sound pretty dynamic. The music was so beautiful and was so powerful in these cartoons and sort of guided these cartoons that I would often tell Tom Madek, mix this thing like a concert. I want to hear that music, because a lot of shows will just bury the music and put the sound effects on top. But certainly on Tiny Toons, I did not want them to bury the music. I wanted to hear it. So mixes would sometimes take hours because I had a lot of opinions, I guess. But they paid off because the mixes were always beautiful, and they did a great job. So then maybe there's a recording session that day. And so I'll go over to Burbank, Sound Castle, or in Glendale or in Burbank, and the actors will show up. Andrea Romano, the voice director, will be there, and her crew. And we'll probably do a read-through of the entire episode. and then get all the actors in there at one time and have them interact with each other. And then Andrea and I will, have them revise their performances as we feel they need to. So that will be another couple hours at least. Those usually took an entire afternoon, the recording sessions. Script meetings, story meetings, those took up a lot of the rest of the day. I'd meet with Sherry Stoner, Wayne Katz, Paul Dini, different writers, and we'd go over the scripts and the premises. Sometimes I'd have a new idea that they would run with. And then I would go around and meet with each director and see how they're doing that day, how their crew is dealing with, the stress and the amount of work. Storyboards tended to always take longer than one might expect. And so I'd meet with the different director on the storyboard that they're working on at that time, and we'd go over it and make changes as needed. Sometimes I'd have to meet with the bosses, Gene McCurdy. Usually Gene just let us go do what we had to do. I think I probably missed some things, but but that's the general idea.
Could you talk about Gene McCurdy?
Yeah, I met Gene at Hanna-Barbera, early 80s, like 1980, and we worked together from 1980 to 2001, so 21 years. And we were very tight. Yeah, we really knew how each other lived and operated, and, we took care of each other as best we could. And she gave me a great opportunity here, and I'm very grateful to her.
How did Animaniacs come about?
Well, Tiny Toons was a hit. Stephen came to me and said, "Okay, what's next?" I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean nothing?" So, well, we've got a big hit. We have to follow it up with another hit. I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, I've got some ideas for that." And Stephen said, "Well, I think we should do like the Plucky Duck Show as a spin-off. We should do like a spin-off." And I said, "Oh, gosh, we've been doing Tiny Toons for a couple of years now, and I think everybody would like to do something new. And so I'd like to try some new characters, some new ideas." And he said, "Well, all right, I'll listen to him, but if it's going to be something new, just so you know, it has to have a marquee name." And so, "Well, it'll have a marquee name. It'll say Steven Spielberg Presents." That was the marquee name. He said, No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the characters, the stars of the show, need to have a name. They need to be known, a marquee name. Otherwise, it's the new Plucky Duck Show. So I was sort of screwed because I had a bunch of new characters I wanted to pursue, and they didn't have a marquee name. They were sort of Marx Brothers-esque, but didn't have a name. So anyway, the next day, I'm walking across the lot, going to some meeting, and I see the water tower, the big water tower over the Warner's lot, the WB emblem on it. And I had this cartoon epiphany where I realized there's the marquee name, Warner Brothers. It's up on the marquee. It's up on the water tower. And my characters, I can name them the Warner Brothers and their sister Dot. I can name them the Warner Brothers. They can live in the water tower. And that's where Yakko, Wakko, and Dot ultimately had their beginning. So I went and told Spielberg this, and he laughed that I had come up with a marquee name so sort of twisted. And we went to the Warner Brothers family, and Harry and Jack, and their family okayed our use of the Warner Brothers name as cartoon characters. So that's how the initial group of characters, Yakko, Wakko, and Dot, came to be. Pinky and the Brain were based on a writer and storyboard artist that I previously mentioned in this conversation. Tom Minton is the personality behind the Brain, and Eddie Fitzgerald is who I used to fashion Pinky. And and the reason this came about, Tom Minton had an office next to mine there at Warner Brothers. And Eddie would go in there every once in a while, and they'd just be shooting the breeze. And Minton had the Minton had the habit of just talking in a low whisper, and he'd whispering. And Eddie would lean in close to him and listen closely. And Minton was funny, and Eddie would just roar with laughter. Just gales of laughter would be coming out of the office. You'd hear like, and so And I would wonder, what the heck are these two guys doing in there? It's like, Minton sounds like he's plotting, and Eddie's loving it. It's like they're taking over the world. I mean, what would they do if they took over the world, those two? That's where Pinky and the Brain came from.
Were there any other ideas that were brought to Spielberg? I know there was a big creative smorgasbord of ideas, Buttons and Mindy, Rita and Runt things. Were there any that were pitched that he declined that you remember for Animaniacs specifically?
Yeah, two raccoons, Nipsey and Russell. Nipsey and Russell were two raccoons, and they got nixed. That's somewhat famous Saturday morning where we all, a bunch of us went and pitched stuff to Stephen at his home. That's the meeting where Mindy and Buttons were knocked out, and then Spielberg's family came in, and one of the kids pointed at Mindy and said, "I like her," and Mindy and Buttons were revived. But Nipsey and Russell got killed that day. I know that.
Could you describe a typical Animaniacs episode for someone who has never seen it? And best of luck.
Someone who's never seen it. Oh, all right. So it's animation. It's a cartoon show. It has a fancy main title. I won't sing it for you, but it goes, we're Animaniacs and we're zany to them. So anyway, the main title tells you about these three characters that live in a water tower, Yakko, Wakko, and Dot, and they break loose from the water tower every day. They're supposed to be kept in there, but they break loose and they go on adventures where they run into sort of obnoxious, pompous, self-important people, and they burst the bubble of those sorts of people. And there are other characters that are part of this Animaniacs universe. There are Pinky and the Brain, two lab mice trying to take over the world. There's Slappy Squirrel and Skippy Squirrel. They live in a park in Burbank, and Slappy just wants to be left alone. She's an old lady squirrel, and she gets annoyed by lots of things. And she was a cartoon character from many years ago, and she used dynamite in her cartoons, and she's still using it. There's Rita and Runt, who are a homeless cat and a homeless dog who have teamed up together to go find a home for each other. And they get close, but they never quite make it. And those cartoons always have a pretty good song in them because Rita is played by the great songstress Bernadette Peters. Then we have other segments. Mindy and Buttons is about a lassie-type dog that saves his master, Mindy, on every adventure, but gets annihilated every time he tries to save her, which goes back to, now that I think about it, that first cartoon I wrote, which was Pitts and his pal, where Pitts was always saving his pal. So that's what Minnie and Buttons is like. There are other little segments. There's Mime Time with a mime in it. There's Katie Kaboom. There's Chicken Boo, about a chicken who thinks he's a human and dresses up like a human, and then people realize he's a chicken. Just a bunch of different things. And spread throughout the animated shows and the animated series are little wraparounds, little intros provided by the Warners. Those are, meant to amuse you while you're waiting for the main feature. And you want to do, is that good enough?
Yeah. You brought up that that one had a little bit more flow in regards to rearranging episodes into each different 30-minute episode.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yes. What benefits came with that and what disadvantages came with that?
The way that I pieced them together?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So Animaniacs was made, let's see, how do I approach this? Before we pieced any particular half hour of Animaniacs together, first we made a whole bunch of cartoons of different lengths. So we wanted to front load our series. We wanted the first 2-3 weeks of Animaniacs to have just great material. So we front loaded it with our best stuff that was finished or ready to go at that point. So I had all the episodes that we had finished on cards up on my wall with the lengths of each cartoon. So basically I'd take my favorite cartoons and piece them together. And once I hit 22 minutes, which was the length of the show, I was done. So basically we really wanted to put our best foot forward. There was no disadvantage to this. Occasionally we would have to burn off some cartoons that we knew weren't that great. We'd actually have an episode that was just filled with not our best stuff, but very rarely was that the case. And this way we could have half-hour cartoons that would have a taste of the Warners, a taste of Pinky and the Brain, maybe a taste of Slappy Squirrel, and really have a variety show that each day would bring you some new characters.
You brought up the Animaniacs theme earlier. Who wrote that theme?
I wrote that theme.
Do you consider yourself a songwriter?
I consider myself a lyricist. Yep. Yeah, that song I think is beautiful, and it works. I wrote the lyrics for Tiny Toons, Pinky and the Brain, Animaniacs, Freakazoid, Road Rovers, Hysteria, and I also wrote lyrics for a pup named Scooby-Doo main title. So I've done a lot of lyrics for a lot of main titles, and I do like doing that. I like the process. Because, I mean, the shows are shows that I created, so I feel like I know what I want the audience to know going in. There's certain information you want the audience to immediately hear and accept so that the show itself can be enjoyable without them having to, like, buy into a whole bunch of stuff.
What are some of your favorite episodes of Animaniacs?
Good question. What did I just watch the other day? Hearts of Twilight I like a lot. It's a Paul Rudd written script about the Warners having to, it's sort of like Apocalypse Now in cartoon form. The Warners have to go deep into the lot in a golf cart to stop the director, who's like a Jerry Lewis clone, stop him from making this movie that has gone way over budget. And it's kind of an inside joke cartoon, but very, very funny. I love Little Drummer Warners, where the Warners are the shepherds in the field that go to the stable on the night Christ is born, and they perform a Gene Krupa version of Little Drummer Boy. Swing era Little Drummer Boy in the stable. I love Bumby's mom, Slappy Squirrel. Skippy sees the movie Bumby, where Bumby's mom is shot, and Skippy, the squirrel, is inconsolable, is just weeping profusely. And Slappy says, "It's just a movie. It's not real." "No, but you got it." And Slappy takes Skippy to a retirement village in like Prescott, Arizona. I forget where, somewhere like that. They fly there, and Slappy introduces Skippy to the cartoon deer actress who played Bumby's mom. Very, very cute cartoon. Pinky and the Brain. I like Win Big. I like Where Rodents Dare. I mean, I like so many of the Warner's cartoons too. It's hard to pick out a favorite. I love them all.
One segment that I wanted to ask about, the Wheel of Morality.
Yes. Well, early on, I knew I wanted to have some sort of recurring bits. One of the advantages of a thing like Wheel of Morality is that it uses the same footage over and over. And so we spend the money to make this 30-second cartoon with a few variables, but we probably spend the money to make 45 seconds of cartoon, and then we repeat that in 30-second installments over 20 episodes. I mean, the savings is enormous. So there's that. There's a value, monetary value to the Wheel of Morality. And of course we put different words in their mouths each time, but when Yakko's saying the moral of the story, he is holding a piece of paper in front of his face, so you don't need the lip sync. But one of the great things about Wheel of Morality, if a show comes up short, we can throw in a 30-second Wheel of Morality and bring it together. But those are beautiful and completely cynical and very funny. Like one of the Wheels of Morality. What's the moral of today's story? And they spin the wheel, and moral number 7, and Yakko reads the moral, and it's like, If at first you don't succeed, blame it on your parents. Just that's a typical one. Let's see. If you have nothing nice to say, you're probably at the ice capades. Just, that's the sort of attitude that is found in the Wheel of Morality. And Sherry Stone, our story editor, her husband, Mark Sweeney, wrote many of the best Wheel of Morality morals.
People in glass houses should get dressed with the lights off. Was that a reference to pro-social messages in previous cartoons of the past?
Yes, it was kind of a, words to grow on, or NBC, CBS, ABC on Saturday morning would have these little lessons in between half hours where they would teach a kid brush your teeth and say thank you. So that's what those were in reference to.
Did you ever have to write anything like that in a previous cartoon?
Well, I wrote. You can see this online, and not that your eyes will burn, but I wrote something called the ABC Sneak Peek and Fun Fitness Test, and it was a preview special for the following Saturday morning's cartoons that would be on ABC. This was a primetime special that featured Tony Danza and Mary Lou Retton and the droids from Star Wars in live action. And they basically previewed clips from the upcoming ABC Saturday morning shows. And at the same time, they gave a lot of tips to kids about how to stay healthy and exercise and eat right and all that. So I wrote that, which is kind of like a half-hour version of one of those.
Eventually, what network did Animaniacs first premiere on?
Fox.
What was it like working with Fox?
Great. Margaret Lesh, she was my boss from Hanna-Barbera days. She was in charge of Fox, and they were just delighted to have another hit with Steven. They basically owned the Saturday morning They basically owned the kid real estate space on TV because they had our shows. They had Batman. They had did they have Batman yet? They had our shows. They had Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, but they also had they had Power Rangers. They had the Power Rangers. So they were a very popular kids network at the time.
And in '95, the WB network is formed and created. How did you find out about the network that would be WB?
McCurdy told me about it, and we were both sad and disappointed because we knew right off the bat the WB was going to have much less coverage than the Fox affiliates. And so the WB was really Jamie Kellner's baby. He had convinced the powers that be, Bob Daly and Terry Semel at Warner Brothers, that it would be good for Warner Brothers to own its own network, and that it would be dicey for the first couple of years, but ultimately you'd be a master of your own fate. And they bought this, but we were the lambs to the slaughter because we had dominated the ratings for kids with our shows on Fox, and suddenly all our shows have shifted over to the WB, Kids WB, and we probably have half the audience now. It really was a kind of a come down.
Did you buy that it would succeed at some point?
No, I did not think that the WB was going to succeed.
I know there's a story behind the premiere date of when the WB went live. Could you tell that story if you remember it?
Do you mean that it went dark?
Yes.
If I recall correctly, the WB was going live for the first time on a Sunday evening, and Chuck Jones himself, creator of Michigan J. Frog, who was the mascot of the WB, Michigan J. Frog, the mascot of the WB. Chuck Jones was going to greet viewers, welcome them, turn the light on for the sign that said the WB, and just have a nice, wholesome, happy opening, and then Michigan J. Frog will sing his little dance, and then we'll go to the first show on the WB, which I think was going to be Pinky and the Brain, was it not?
I believe you are correct, but I don't know for certain.
Anyway, in L.A., nobody ever saw that. If you turned on the channel, it was the WB, I think it was 5, you're ready to see Pinky and the Brain and the opening of the WB, and it's just black, just darkness, silence for like 12 minutes. And then suddenly we're in the middle of a Pinky and the Brain scene. That's what I recall, but my memory may be soft. I don't know.
I do remember, off tangent, I do remember when I was growing up, those difficulties were constant with that network. Do you know if that, I don't know if that was that way in L.A. Well, Pinky and the Brain got spun off. How did that happen?
I was at a meeting, I remember, with Fox and with Steven. It was at Amblin. McCurdy was there. And Steven, it was like Steven and Margaret said the same thing at the same time, quite literally. That Pinky and the Brain need their own show. And I quite honestly don't remember. I don't think whoever said it first, the other one said, I was just going to say that. Anyway, so they both wanted a Pinky and the Brain spinoff. So we started earmarking Pinky and the Brain cartoons for that entity, and we started pulling them off Animaniacs. So the cartoons we had in the works that were featuring Pinky and the Brain suddenly were pulled and devoted to the new Pinky and the Brain half-hour series. But the network wanted half-hour stories with Pinky and the Brain, and they wanted, this is the WB. And so Margaret's now out of it because she was with Fox. She wanted a Pinky and the Brain series, but the WB has usurped and taken over our show. So now Pinky and the Brain is being made for the WB, and we weren't planning on it being a primetime series. We were just going to make it its own sort of spin-off, but it'd play on Saturday morning in the afternoon. No, the WB needs product, and it'd be perfect for the 7 o'clock death slot. Thank you very much. Because 7 p.m. for any channel other than CBS and 60 Minutes, 7 p.m. Sunday night is like death. So that's where they put Pinky and the Brain. So Peter Hastings wanted to take the Pinky and the Brain assignment and run with it. And I had Animaniacs, I had Road Rovers, I had Freakazoid I was busy with. It's still some Batman work. So Peter pulled together some writers and worked on the animated series of Pinky and the Brain, which, unfortunately, Peter is great and knows Pinky and the Brain backwards and forwards and is brilliant with them. Unfortunately, the network really kind of tied his hands and made him add kind of weird sitcom things, like there'd be a neighbor next door. There's a next door neighbor to Acme Labs, and it would be Dick Clark, and he would come by. There's just weird stuff like that. They really wanted a sitcom. They wanted to add family members for Pinky and the Brain. It's like they bought Pinky and the Brain, but they didn't want Pinky and the Brain. So it was strange. And it ran for, I think a season, and then it didn't. Then we continued making the 65 half hours of Pinky and the Brain. After it went off prime time, it went to daytime. And then we finished the order, making new episodes for the daytime schedule.
I know this is a little bit later, and we can backtrack if you want, but how did Pinky, Elmyra, and the Brain come about?
I think Christopher Keenan, who was working at Warner's, came up with the idea of teaming them, and Steven did not object. And since it was going to employ people and keep people working, I didn't want to object either, but I didn't think it made a lot of sense because I didn't know, because there are people that like Elmyra, but kids hate her. They just hate her. She's never been popular. So to put her with Pinky and the Brain, I thought was, I think you could have come up with anybody, Pinky, Jonas Salk in the ring. Right? It could have been anyone. Might have been better, but that's what happened.
We're jumping back slightly in Freakazoid.
Yes.
One of my personal favorites.
Oh, I love it.
What was the impetus of Freakazoid?
The impetus, you said?
The start of. Yeah.
Well, by this point, Steven was in love with us, with me, with everything we were doing. He loved Animaniacs and knew that we were, making cartoons for everybody. At the same time, Steven was working with Paul Dini and Bruce Timm on Freakazoid, which was, an animated superhero show. And Bruce and Paul were making it very much, a zany superhero, but the stories were pretty straight, and the superhero was capable of doing wild things, but it wasn't necessarily a funny show. And I think Steven was so happy with Animaniacs that he wanted to just continue doing that sort of comedy in the superhero genre. So once Bruce realized that, he thought that maybe he wasn't the right guy. And I don't know the order of how that came about, whether Steven thought, hey, we should get Ruegger and his gang involved, if Steven said that to Bruce, or if Bruce pulled out first and then Steven said, oh, we'll go over with Ruegger and group. Anyway, so Freakazoid existed before I ever got involved. And McCurdy called me in and said, okay, Bruce and Paul are not going to do it. Steven wants you to do it, but you got to do it now because we're going on the air in September with this, and we don't have a show, and it's January, and you got to really get cranking. So in January, one really rainy weekend, I spent the entire weekend just writing a Freakazoid script, basically. I wrote 90 pages of Freakazoid material. But it really wasn't just Freakazoid. It was sort of anything that I could think of. It was sort of just typing away. Anything I could think of that was funny involving a superhero. And no matter what, I used Freakazoid in the superhero role. So I did that, and I brought in like 90 pages of stuff, and I gave it to McCurdy and Spielberg, and they both liked it, but they said it's like you put a superhero in a blender here. These are, because they were all little pieces, little tiny short things. And he said, we're going to need to have a story too, in each episode. I said, oh yeah, but this is the mood, the attitude I'm thinking of. And they said, fine. So it was very zany, very, very nutty. And that initial 90 pages, it contained the Handman cartoon. It contained all the Moron and Boron stuff. It contained Batman and Boy Blubber, the Legends Who Lunch, and all those things that are like, and now Freakazoid will play the piano, and now with the announcer, I was like, we interrupt this program to give you an important message. I love you. And now back to our show. It had a lot of that stuff in it. So again, I think Spielberg thought I was a little nuts, but he went with it. So at this point, I handed my script to Paul Rugg and John McCann and said, okay, here's what they've approved. They like this, but now we need stories. So can you guys start coming up with stories? And they did. McCann came up with Dance of Doom, and Paul came up with, I forget which one. And once we had a script, we started auditioning voice actors around town for Freakazoid. And the call went out. We're doing a superhero show, but the superhero is zany. He's nutty. He's crazy. And so everybody in town, literally every voice actor on Earth came in doing, I'm crazy. They just did the stupidest sounding voices on Earth. So I thought the show was going to get canceled before it even got made because we really didn't have a voice that really was worthwhile. So we were doing these auditions, and Rugg would be giving tips to the actors. How about try like this? How about, how about be serious? How about, finally, I said, Rugg, get in there. I'm like, let's record you. Let's see how you do. So I had him record the entire Dance of Doom script, right? And he wasn't the voice of Freakazoid yet. But I had him record the whole script, and I had him do it, as we got to a different part of it, I'd say, oh, do that like Paul Harvey, or do that like Jerry Lewis, that part, or do, at the dance, sing a song here, Paul, just because Paul's a master of improv from the Groundlings and different places. So anyway, so we recorded what Rugg was doing, and I cut it together, and I sent it to Spielberg. I said, I think this is the voice of Freakazoid. And I didn't tell him who it was. And he loved it. And that's how Paul Rugg became Freakazoid.
Did the WB like that show?
No, that show was way too old for the WB, because the WB wanted to sell, cereal and little kid toys. And Freakazoid was theoretically popular with college students and prison inmates. And that's when the WB decided big kids go first, and the WB put Freakazoid on at 7 a.m. Big kids go first. Big kids aren't awake. Yeah.
Now that show, just real quick, did the WB have a different censorship rule than Fox or any of the other cartoons? Because I noticed that Freakazoid has a lot of torturing of the fictional version of the network censor on that show.
Yeah, they pretty much. I think the people from Fox, some of the censors came over from Fox to the WB, so it was pretty much the same group. I never really worried about the censors when I was on a Spielberg show, because quite literally I would say, "Oh no, Steven likes this, so we're not going to change it, whether he liked it or not."
Was Steven okay? I mean, not that it matters now. Was he okay with you using that clout?
Oh, I have no idea. He couldn't possibly know. No, yeah, I'm sure. I don't think he would have liked that. I was basically putting words in his mouth. But there's nothing more painful than gutting a script with censor notes. I mean, it's just like, who wants to do that? Nobody.
Do you know what kind of notes they would come back with? Just for an example.
Yeah, well, like we put in things like, how toyetic can you get? This, which is a marketing term, And they would say, well, kids don't understand that. And we would say, well, we know, but, after they see it, they might understand it. Yeah, but you're going to lose them. I said, well, this can be a learning experience. See, a lot of the censor notes would be sort of playing down to the kids. In other words, let the kids have some things in the show that maybe they don't completely get, but it'll make sense at some point.
It's where we all learned about William Shatner for the first time.
That's right. Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
A couple more shows. Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries.
Was not involved.
Okay.
At all.
Tasmania, you're credited. Were you involved with that?
Yeah, as an executive producer. That's an example of the executive producer knowing that he's got the right guy in the right job. So that's Art Vitello was the master behind Tasmania and loved the show and cared about it and nurtured it. And by the time he was done with it, he was totally exhausted. And I think he just went home and never came back.
Road Rovers.
Road Rovers. That show should have gotten more, another season or two. That's where the WB basically, I think they must have been in the mood to give me a show, seriously, because it's like I went in there and I said, "Oh, here's a show. It's got dogs. It's the superheroes." And it was like one pitch, done, sold, make it. It's like the easiest pitch on earth. And, I think it was well made. We had great people involved. And I think the story is kind of fun. There were 4 episodes that you can string together. I forget the titles of them, but there are 4 episodes of Road Rovers that if you string them together, they make a perfect loop because there's a time travel element to the series. And these 4 episodes make an endless loop. No one knows that.
The Mobius strip of card. No one knows that other than
no.
people. Wow.
No.
I remember it vivid. I know not the endless time loop, but I remember the show
Well, the
vividly.
first episode and the first episode, I think the second to last episode are the connection, I think, and then the two in the middle are key too.
Someone listening to this
Anyway.
figured out. Hysteria, one of my favorites as a kid.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're the one. That show, Hysteria, an educational kid group. I mean, a group. It was like Peggy Charon's group that really was looking out for the kids and what was they could watch and what was good. They put out a report that they sent to the Warner Brothers publicity department, and the report said that if Hysteria were aired as frequently as Power Rangers, basically kids in America would be smarter and it would be a better world. I mean, it was just basically their report was that Hysteria was the best thing for kids in sliced bread, and really, the world needs to get on board with the show. Warner Brothers, I'm still, my brain still bleeds from this, trying to come up with the person who did it, but the head of the publicity department at Warner Brothers killed the article, made the article not run. In other words, you cannot print that article. They had to rewrite that article for Warner Brothers because, and I said, why? Why would you do that? Why? Because Warner Brothers doesn't want to be known as an educational programming company. We want to be known as an entertainment company, not as an educator. I said, well, can't we have one show that's that way? No, it's against our brand. So anyway, but Hysteria, anyway, you weren't asking about that. What do you want to know about Hysteria?
How did it come to be? The rumor is that it was because of the FCC mandates that I guess it come a few years prior.
Well, the FCC did indeed ask for every station across the country to have a certain number of educational kid show hours each week. And so when I heard that, I had this idea for a comedy history show. So I started working on that and got some of the crew working on it. And then we did a big pitch for Bob Daly and Terry Semmel and the other executives at Warner Brothers in like the executive dining room. Paul Rugg did his comedy routine that was Nostradamus. He did the whole Nostradamus thing. He did it as sort of a magic show. It was hilarious. Anyway, they bought the concept. We got an order for 65 half hours that ultimately got cut down to 52 half hours or 54, I forget. And I thought it was a good show. It had a lot of good information. Maybe it had too much educational stuff, but it had a lot of good comedy, and I think any kid that watched it certainly picked up some information about some of the key characters of history.
It's where I learned that President Nixon had 5 o'clock shadow. Around the time you have Wakko's Wish, I don't know how much we can go into that, but how did the first Animaniacs movie, and only as of right now, Animaniacs movie come to pass?
Well, let's see. Why did that even happen? I think Warner Brothers was seeing that home video was lucrative, and they wanted to get involved in that. So they said, Ruegger, let's get a feature-length cartoon going. So I wrote that up. I had some other writers help, and I remember one day, it was quite a long day, it was morning and afternoon. I got the entire Animaniacs crew together in a big, huge room that we had that we kind of cleared some desks away. And I acted out Wakko's Wish. I acted all the parts and played it out for everybody. Actually, it was just one morning, the 3-hour morning. And anyway, it was a great, for me, it was a really good experience. And I think the crew appreciated all the thought and work that went into it. And I think it's a beautifully animated show. We did have a screening, just like we had a screening of the Tiny Toons summer vacation video that was years before. We had a screening for the public, Animaniacs movie, or Wakko's Wish, and the scores were very, very high. And, I think if we had been made by the feature department, we would have just been sent out and it would have been done. But Bob Daly looked at the scores and said, yeah, they're really good. I said, so we're going to be distributed? So we're going to be sent out? And he turned to me and said, if you got $5 million, yeah. Because that's the minimum you need to put a movie out in movie theaters. You need some promotion. And so it really comes down to the advertising budget didn't exist.
Were you ever involved in advertisement for any of the shows you worked on?
The WB would run some stuff by me, and if the WB would, and if there was something wrong, I would say, hey, that character's painted wrong, or that character wouldn't say that. So a little bit. I was consulted on the when the albums, music albums from Animaniacs were distributed or were brought to market. I was told that by the music department, by the I guess it's merchandising, licensing, that they weren't going to include the Wakko burp songs on the album, and I had a huge blow up with them because I thought that would really make the sales. I think it would have helped the sales, but they refused. They said mothers don't want to hear that when they're driving their kids to school in the car. I said, yeah, but the kids do.
Who did those burp sounds?
That was Maurice LaMarche. He burped over. He did a bunch of burps, and then our sound effect editor, Russell Brower, who's also a brilliant musician who has done music for all sorts of video games. Russell Brower took all the burps and he assigned musical note value to the different burps and lengths to the different ones. And so we had, a full keyboard of assigned notes to the burps, and he could probably play any song with the burps. But anyway, brilliant.
So I have a couple more shows, just one or two writing credits there with the WB. I don't know if you have any memory of Batman Beyond.
Oh yeah, my credit is I don't have much to say there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Duck Dodgers.
Oh yeah, I wrote that for Paul Dini. I love the title of this one. Of course, this means war and peace, and a double episode. I think maybe the only written double episode. They weren't writing those cartoons; they were boarding them. And so Dini came to me and said, "We need to get something done. Boarding's taking too long. Would you write this?" They definitely should have written maybe all of those, because Daffy needs good writers, in my opinion.
Lunatics Unleashed.
Yeah, I had gone into Warner Brothers a month before they announced Lunatics Unleashed, or not a month, maybe 2 months. And I had pitched a show called Lunatics, and it starred Daffy and Bugs and all sorts of different characters with some other outside characters that I was proposing. And it was a full-on, pitch development. And it might have had an additional name, like something Lunatics or blank Lunatics. Anyway, so then 2 months later, they come up with Lunatics Unleashed. And so my lawyer called them up and said, hey, you stole his title. And we'll give him a consulting, we'll pay him a fee and name him as a consultant, and that's it. So I got a little money. It's just sort of a nuisance thing. But I had nothing to do with it.
When and why did you leave the WB?
Not the WB. I left Warner Brothers. The WB is the network itself, which I didn't really work for the network. I worked for Warner Brothers Animation. So they're completely different entities. But I left when Jean McCurdy announced she was going to be leaving within a year. And a guy named Sander Schwartz was going to come in and become the new head person at Warner Brothers Animation. And they needed to sort of clear the deck for Sander, not have like the previous regime in place. So anyway, that's kind of the main reason I left Warner's.
What do you think is the legacy of Warner Brothers Animation, if you're big into legacies?
Yeah, I think we showed that we could still make really funny cartoons in the Looney Tune tradition. I think we showed that maybe better than any show has shown with Animaniacs. I think the 90s will be known as the era where Warner Brothers Animation came back and led the charge of quality TV animation.
A couple post-Warner Brothers projects. Animalia?
Yeah, Animalia. Yeah, with Bruce Johnson and Porchlight and a whole gang from Australia, including Graham Bass, who created the Animalia book. And we basically took his book and used some of the characters from the book to create a whole sort of world, sort of a mirror universe to our own, or another dimension currently with our own world where animals rule. And by the time I was involved, the concept was already sort of solidified. And I think what held the show back a little bit was the concept was a little bit complicated and convoluted. But the animation was pretty good. It was for CGI. And the scripts were pretty good. Stoner and McCann and Deanna Oliver wrote scripts for it, and Nick Hollander. That was for the BBC, by the way. And then I went over to Disney and worked on the 7D, which I loved that experience. That was a lot of fun. And that was with a great crew. We had a beautiful, great crew. Alfred Gimeno, Charles Visser were among the leaders of the directors. And Perry Grip provided the music. And the network people, Emily Hart and Nancy Cantor, were just really wonderful and great to work with them.
Were you apprehensive to work with for Disney?
No. They said, when you're doing the 7D, we don't want a dozen different shows, because we feel like Animaniacs is a dozen different shows. We just want one show about the 7D. And I totally get that. And that's what we did. See, we knew we had 7 shows with them because we had 7 great characters.
Do you think you were able to, it wasn't the Animaniacs, obviously, but was it able to capture the spirit of?
I think there are probably, out of, what did we make, 40-some episodes? There are probably 10 half hours out of the 40, or maybe half, that are really in the spirit of Animaniacs, that are beautifully animated and have the energy. And then there are the other 20, there are usually good things. And there are a few episodes that are sort of like almost preschool, because at some point, at one early point, we were making it for preschool. But then by the second season, we were not making it for preschool. We were making some really zany stuff.
Do you want to talk about Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures real quick?
Paul Rugg and I were called in to redevelop Pac-Man. And so we had like four meetings with the people that owned Pac-Man. And then Paul and I went off and wrote a bunch of stuff, and they loved it. And we were supposed to be the story editors of the series, but they had a clause in their contract. It turns out they wanted us to develop a series, and then they wanted to just go make it and not have us involved. So there was a clause in their contract that if we didn't become the story editors, they would pay us like, $5,000 or something, which is what they did, which is fine.
Say, were you happy with the finished product, even though you weren't involved?
I've never seen Pac-Man Ghost thing. I have seen. I saw half of an episode, and I would say that I'm glad that we didn't do more than we did.
How much has the animation industry changed since you started?
Well, we were drawing everything with pencils and papers when I started. We were in-betweening on paper. We were Xeroxing them and then putting them in front of a camera here in L.A. We're painting them in L.A., painting the cells. So I really started at that very tippy end of that era, because 2 years later, they were shipping everything overseas and it was all being painted over there. But the real change, of course, was when we're not painting the cells anymore. We're using digital coloring and we're making the entire animated film inside the computer. And the time and money saved is hard to comprehend how much. That's why you're seeing so much animation happening because it just doesn't take as many, well, wait a minute. It takes a lot of people to make an animated film, but I think a lot of people are seeing that there's a great deal of upside to making an animated film because if you have a hit, it's a hit for all ages. I don't know how you're going to piece that one together. Good luck.
What do you see as the future for animation?
I think kids are. I think animation up till now has still sort of been mostly a kid genre, and I think that's what's changing dramatically. And I think we'll be seeing more and more adult material in animation. I don't know. I suppose I'm sure there's going to be 3D animation that's impressive. I think there's going to be a lot of virtual reality animation that's going to be wild. You're going to be able to interact with the cartoon characters. So I think it's a pretty bright future.
In terms of your work in the industry, what is your proudest achievement?
Animaniacs.
Why?
Well, that's the show that I was told, hey, go make the show. Basically, you know, when my wife told me, go tell them about your favorite cartoons. Well, Animaniacs was very similar to go make your favorite cartoons. So I really loved the process of Animaniacs. I loved all the people I worked with on Animaniacs. I love what we achieved, and I love the characters we created. And just it's got more of me in it than anything else I've ever made.
What advice would you have for someone who wanted to work in the television industry?
In animation?
Yes.
I think you have to live in Los Angeles, unless there's some place on this planet where there's a lot of animation taking place. I mean, I know there's plenty of stuff happening in Japan and Korea and in India and all sorts of different places, but I think in the U.S., Los Angeles, Burbank continue to be the animation epicenter. So unless you're working up in the San Francisco area, or I think there's a place in Connecticut, I think LA is the place to be. And then you want to go and try to get a job at a place where they're making shows that you appreciate and like, and you think you could be a good addition to their staff. I mean, Hanna-Barbera was a perfect fit for me when I came out here because I loved Hanna-Barbera. If you love Warner Brothers cartoons, if you love Cartoon Network cartoons or Nickelodeon show or there's a Nickelodeon show that you love, I would start papering those places, contacting people there, emailing, getting your stuff seen by people there. And these companies are always looking for the next big thing, and they're looking for new talent. And walk in with some talent, and you'll get a job.
Thank you, Tom Ruegger, for telling your story.
Thank you, Joshua. This was, you must be dead tired, but thanks for listening. 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 Tired, but thanks for